Good morning. You're listening to Florida Commercial Real Estate Radio. I am your host, Doug Dennison, and we are broadcasting from beautiful St. Augustine, Florida, the nation's oldest city, at WFOY 1240 AM studios. I will also have a co-host, Jerry Anderson, a CCIM from Sperry Van Ness Commercial Real Estate Advisors in Palm Beach County, will be calling in today as the co-host. Through the power of the Internet, this program is being streamed worldwide on 1240news.com. The show will also be archived on svn.com, as Sperry Van Ness Commercial Real Estate Advisors are the sponsors of this program. Additionally, the show will be posted on youtube.com. We're going to be talking about commercial real estate all around Florida, different real estate markets across the state. We've got lots of topics today. Again, to help us out, we've got a caller. Let's get him on the line. Good morning. You're on the air.
Yes, good morning. Mark Alexander here.
Hey, Mark. This is Doug Dennison, and we have on the line Jerry Anderson. Jerry, can you say hi to Mark?
Good morning, Mark. Thank you for dialing in. I'm really anxious for our listeners this morning to hear about you and some of the things that you're doing, because you have a topic that I'm sure Doug's going to ask about in a moment that a lot of folks are going to be interested in.
Well, you are, again, Jerry, in charge of Florida. Why don't you kind of introduce him, because I know off the air you have been very high on Mark and his skill level. Can you tell us a little bit about him, and then we'll let Mark kind of fill in the blanks there.
I'll be happy to. He's a humble guy, so I'll do a better job of introducing than he would. Mark's been in the industry for quite a while. He's an engineer by training. I'm sure he'll mention something in that regard. But he's always been one of the top performers at Sperry Van Ness. He was one of the early advisors to come on the state of Florida, and I'd have to look back. I'm sure Mark will remember exactly. But my gosh, Mark, I think you've been with us since 2001 or 2. When did you come on board?
I've been with the company now, I think, 11 years.
That's what I thought. I thought you had been here for quite a while. And what's interesting is that Mark focuses on a couple specialties. He'll tell you about that here in a moment. But he's currently in Fort Myers, Florida.
Yeah.
He's originally from Boston, but he follows the Boston Red Sox, so I have to put up with that being a Yankees fan. But I still love him nonetheless. And I love him because he does a great. I'm telling you what, Doug. He is the epitome of what we talked about earlier in terms of helping his clients solve problems. So, Mark, we appreciate you dialing in today.
Very good, Mark. Before we get you on to your specialty, which everybody's very interested in hearing, what part of Boston you're from?
Well, Doug, first of all, thank you for hosting this. I grew up just south of Worcester, Massachusetts, on the Mass-Connecticut border, and I went to college at a little school called Massachusetts Maritime Academy on Cape Cod, where I got an engineering degree.
Very, very good. I was born in Massachusetts and went to Springfield College, and actually one of my first jobs was at the Boston YMCA 1,000 years ago. So
excellent. Go Red Sox.
Yeah, go Red Sox. And well, don't say that too loudly. We've got Jerry on the line, of course.
I'm a true Red Sox fan. I have to say it loudly, my friend.
All right. You are the man as far as medical office specialties. Tell us a little bit about that. Why did you go into that area? And who do you go after? And Jerry says you are a problem solver. What problems do you solve for your clients?
Well, first, I know how to get the best spring season tickets in Fort Myers. So
Very important.
Fort Myers, I've got season tickets.
Very important.
Thank you. I'm sorry to be glib. Yes, my background in my career, I've had my real estate brokerage license now in Florida for 30 years. I have sold 81 medical office buildings in my career, spread over 5 states. Most of those were in Florida. I'm also an author. I've had over 50 published articles, mostly for the local Fort Myers news press, along with some other trade journals. focusing on commercial real estate issues, and in particular on medical office buildings. And I, as part of my duties as national chair for the medical office specialty with Sperry Van Ness, I host a bi-monthly national medical call where I train other agents coast to coast within our company on how to work with doctors and how to go after and list these medical office buildings. And by doing that, they often call me in to do co-presentations with them, and that's how I come to list buildings in other states other than my own.
Got it. And I do, I'm looking at your bio, you've been a speaker for CCIM Outlook conferences in Fort Myers and dinner seminars for doctors in San Francisco, Chicago, Kansas City, Raleigh, Charlotte, Charleston, Orlando, Naples, Fort Myers. You've got a good frequent flyer program.
I couldn't hold a job anywhere.
So I'm just going to put myself into the doctor's position, which sure. You know that they're busy all the time, and they're doing lots of things. They're saving lives. They're doing very important stuff. And sometimes, they don't have all the time and the energy to kind of figure out what they need to do financially, and especially with, real estate. And so, how do you get them together? Because I know it must be difficult. I'm sure word of mouth is probably your best asset. You do something good for one doctor, and you use them as a reference, and they talk to somebody else, and all of a sudden you're doing good.
Yes, well, there's actually, Doug, there's no one silver bullet on how to get in front of doctors.
Okay.
There's a long laundry list of things that I do on a regular basis, excuse me, to get in front of them. One of the most important questions is, why would they want to do one of these sale-leasebacks? What's in it for them?
Okay.
And basically, when it comes, ownership is great as long as you can someday sell it and get that money back and hopefully at a profit.
Right.
And doctors working in a practice, the practice is usually designed to be perpetual. After the senior doctors retire, the young ones come in, and the ball keeps rolling down the hill. When do you cash out your equity? And so if the doctors really have two main choices when they sell their buildings when they get near the end of their career, and that is they're either going to sell it to an investor and do a sale-leaseback, or they're going to sell it to a fellow doctor or like a hospital. And basically, if they do a sale-leaseback to an investor, today they'll get roughly 30 to 40% higher value than they will if they sell it to a fellow doctor or a hospital. Why is that? It's because of how the property is appraised. If they sell it to another doctor or to a hospital, they determine the sales price most of the time, because the seller will always want the highest price, the buyer will always want, the lowest price. They'll usually put it, and these people are doing business with each other, they'll usually put it to a separate third party, which is the local appraisal. The appraiser cannot use the in-house lease. Why? Because you have related parties in both entities. You have doctors that are in the LLC that own the building, and these same doctors are in the medical practice that is also the tenant. So it is not arm's length. So they cannot use that. And so the property gets valued as though it's vacant. They look purely at comps. What's happened over the last few years with this economy? Bad things. We've got a lot of low comps in there.
Right.
I'll give you one example. A building that I sold for Florida Cancer Specialists. They have over 140 doctors and over 45 locations spread throughout Florida. The building that they have in South Fort Myers on New Hampshire Court, it appraised a year before I came on the scene at $1.2 million, and I showed up less than a year later. We did a sale leaseback, and it sold and appraised at $1.7 million, because now the appraiser must count that lease. See, it's the lease that drives the value on commercial income properties, and they cannot use that lease when it's an owner-occupied building selling to another user who is going to use the building. So the clear choice for them is to create the highest possible price, and who doesn't want that, regardless of the business, is these sale leasebacks.
You're telling me, Mark, that created about $500,000 additional income for the doctor that owned that office building?
Yes, because when I went into the appointment, as it happens all the time, when I go into the listing presentation, the doctors invariably have in the back of their mind what their most recent appraisal was, and they're waiting to see what this broker is going to come up with, and how close is he going to come to that number, and the surprising thing there was the rent that they had in place at the time was around $28 a square foot, and I said, guys, that's wonderful, but it's too high when we do a sale leaseback because it's not adequately defensible within market conditions. So I got them to reduce the rent from $28 a square foot down to $22 a square foot. And we started a brand new lease at the date of the sale leaseback. And now the appraiser had to count the rent with that lower rent, and it created the higher price of $500,000 more. So they lowered their rent and created a higher price. So and you can tell these things to doctors, and it's not. Excuse me. I just took a dip in the pool, so I'm still shaking off the water. My apologies. The difficult part in communicating with a lot of doctors on these issues is that they simply just don't have training in commercial valuation. It's not their fault. All their study and training has been in medicine, and then their heads are buried with their patients, and their home life. And as I call it, the sort of the doctor treadmill. And so when I come in and I explain these things and say, geez, I think we can get at least $500,000 more, they're just not believing me.
Right.
And of course, after it closed and they put the money in the bank, they're big-time believers now. And basically, my business grows on word of mouth like that,
yes,
because the doctors are in a pretty closed-loop society. They go to the same parties, they have the same friends in common, and it was hardest closing my first medical office sale leaseback. That was in September of 1991 for Associates of Dermatology in Fort Myers. But then since then, I've got 81 under my belt, so it's a lot easier now. And on my website, I've got all the different latest letters of recommendations from different doctors I've helped just in the last couple of years.
Nice.
So when I go into a presentation with a group of doctors and I give them letters of recommendations from doctors they know, and basically I suggest we use the same listing forms, the same contract forms, the same leases that we just used on the last closing, and they get a certain comfort level when they can see fellow doctors who they know use the same forms, had successful deals, and so why reinvent the wheel? So the goal is to keep it simple, working with doctors so they can understand it. And again, not their fault because their training's in medicine, not in business and not certainly in commercial valuation. So people like that need specialists like us at Sperry Van Ness, very much so, because you could see that if they didn't know any better and they just sold the building like many doctors have done in years past, let's just sell it to another fellow doctor. Okay, let's get an appraised value. They don't realize they can't count their in-house lease, and they leave so much money on the table. So we're really helping our doctor clients here.
Well,
what about the healthcare changes that are on the horizon, though, Mark? Is that going to impact the doctor side? We're going to talk about the investor in a moment, but what about on the doctor side?
Yeah.
Because, it's time
thank you for asking that, Jerry. And also thank you for the kind word you said earlier. I appreciate that. If you're a broker specializing in medical office buildings, Obamacare is a gift from heaven. Now, the doctors naturally, 99% of them don't like Obamacare because it's cutting their incomes, starting in less than a year from now, in January 1, 2014. But it's forcing them to watch the bottom line like ever before. Over the last 2 decades of me doing these sale leasebacks, the doctors were only interested in one thing: what's the highest rent I can choose to create for myself to create the highest possible price? And that's the song that was sung constantly. And consequently, I own many record high prices per square foot for medical office sales in most of the cities that I've sold these buildings in. But that's all changed now. Now they're looking, and this is good because this is part of what I think Obamacare is helping to lower the cost of health care in the country. Because now the rents are going to be a lot more reasonable because they're consciously picking not, a sale leaseback in its purest sense. This goes back to my CCIM training, is a self-financing tool. You don't always get the biggest mortgage at the bank just because you can. You get what you need. And for the last 20 years, they've been picking the highest sales price they can get away with, which is just by picking the highest rent. But now that's all changing, and I'll give you an example. I just building that I sold back in February for an orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Kaler, up in Port Charlotte, Florida. When I give presentations, I always give at the end of it a low rent, a medium rent, and a high rent, just so they can see how it works, and they can, not knowing where their head is before the appointment, where their goals are, I lay out the various scenarios. For example, they may want to set the lowest possible rent to maximize profit from the practice going forward, and so they would pick a lower rent, and that would equal to a lower sales price. But then they'd also have low capital gains taxes as well to pay. Or if they want to go to the high end, that the high rent I show them is a rent where I don't believe they should go above, because then it starts becoming not defensible within the market, harder to sell. And then in between, and it depends on the makeup of the practice. If it's a big group and there's some older doctors about to retire, some younger ones, that are just coming in, the older ones will always vote for the highest rent because they don't really care. They're leaving shortly. And the younger ones who have a long career, they're facing them, they usually vote for the lowest rent. So if a deal gets done at all, it's, meeting in the middle somewhere. In Dr. Taylor's case up there, he had some debt on the property. And he says, I would much rather personally guarantee this new 5-year lease than the remaining 19 years of payments I have on my current commercial mortgage. So the sale leaseback, he picked the rent just big enough to pay off his debt. And so he wanted to pick a very frugal rent for his. And it's one of the reasons why the deal flew out the door. But it's using the tool differently than ever before. Not just, creating the highest price I can, but helping them for their business. In his case, he wanted to lower his personal liability going into a more uncertain future where he's anticipating lower reimbursement rates from, Medicare and through this healthcare reform. So it's getting back to good business sense, which is wonderful for our business. Nice. I hope that answers the question. I swam in a few circles there.
No, that was good. That was good. It's interesting because, as somebody that's looking for a doctor, you're always looking for the pro, the best doctor. And it's because that's their specialty in that particular area. And it's a great correlation because the doctors are turning over the leaf and looking for you because you're the specialist in this medical office field. So congratulations. I also hear you write a monthly column for the Fort Myers News Press. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
On
I do,
Sunday.
And I've been blessed. They've been. I keep submitting and they keep publishing it. So I'm going to keep doing it until they stop.
Very good, Jerry. Do you have another question for Mark before he goes out and makes
Doug,
the next deal?
I have a comment I'd like to make on why investors like medical office buildings, and in particular Florida.
Okay.
The underlying fundamentals are just crazy off the charts. The basic points, the bullet points are baby boomer retirements. We have growth that's almost exponential with people with money retiring. Florida is one of the major retirement states, as you know.
Sure. And
the longer you live, the more likely you are to have medical care needs. And because of medical advances, everyone's living longer these days.
Mm-hmm.
And so all these things come together to form this perfect storm where if you're a doctor of almost any specialty, you have really good business, for the next several decades in the state of Florida. So if you're an investor and you're buying a medical office building, that stands pretty good for a long-term stable tenant, because every time I get a first-time MOB medical office building investor, they always say, well, what happens at the end of the lease term? How can we be sure they're going to renew all these options that they required that they have as part of the sale-leaseback deal? And I say, well, use yourself as proof. How many times in your own life, all the doctors in your wife, your wife's OBGYN, your dermatologist, your orthopedic surgeon, your dentist, your chiropractor, how many times have all these doctors in your own life moved their offices in the last 3 decades? Most people blink and say, geez, maybe one of them once. And the ones that do tend to move are maybe somebody who's renting, and why do they move? They usually go into the building that they own. So doctors, it's usually a kiss of death to move for their business, to move around a lot. So they tend to be very stable. And if you're an investor for a commercial income property, what do you want? You want a stable tenant who's going to be there a long time, especially if they're a specialist type like a dentist. A dental building, the only thing more expensive than building out a dental building is an HRS, is a surgery center, because they got to have compressed air, and pipe that to the rooms. They got to have suction lines, with a suction pump and all that. So the likelihood of someone, they just can't move the four walls next door. It's a big capital commitment to build it out for their particular needs. So, and lastly, when you get doctors, it's tough enough to get two people to agree on anything, let alone three, and it's harder for four. Doctors tend to be Class A type, personalities, and they can't always agree on stuff. And it takes agreement even just to move. And there's another reason they tend to stay where they are. So I thank you very much for your time today, and I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Very good. Jerry, do you have one last question for him before he goes and does another deal?
No, you took the words right out of my mouth, Mark. I was going to ask you, well, why is it a good deal for the investor? But I think you did a very good job of answering that. And, Doug, both of us ought to put our heads together and figure out a medical office building that we could buy as an investment.
I was thinking, with the baby boomers, he's exactly right. More healthcare services are going to be needed. It sounds like it's the perfect area. And I was going to ask you about your crystal ball, Mark, about the marketplace, and you just hit it. It's going to be booming, I think, and so good job on your part.
Thank you. And by the way, guys, I have the perfect medical office building for both you guys to buy. Go on my website. It's markalexanderccim.com, and all my listings in there, letters of recommendations from doctors, and a list of all my past deals are on there, too.
Nice. Give us more information on how to get to you for your contact info.
Sure. Thank you. My phone number is 239-826-4174. So that's my cell number. It's a 24/7. You can text me. And the other best way is through the website, markalexanderccim.com. And by the way, I love that analogy you mentioned earlier when you were talking about, when you get sick, you go to a doctor, you want the best one in that specialty. And, the same thing applies when you're looking for a commercial real estate broker. When you get sick, you go to a doctor. You make darn sure it says MD after his name. If the doctor says, well, I went to med school, but I didn't get my last semester, but I'm just as good as them. No, you want the most qualified. And that's why the power of getting these designations Jerry mentioned earlier. In particular, I've got the CCIM. I'm past president of the Southwest CCIM district here in past the vice president for the whole CCIM chapter. So I'm a very big believer for brokers to get involved with that, because when you go before a doctor, if their commercial real estate is as important to them as, say, somebody's health is to them, or, say, somebody's accountant is to them, where they've got CPA after the name, and all these designations, we're a designation-crazy society, to be able to compete on that level, I can't see how you can be in this business and not have those designations to get the best qualifications. Sorry, I'm getting on my horse here.
No,
that's a good commercial for the CCIM designation. What do you think, Doug?
Absolutely, it's good stuff, Mark. I want to thank you for calling in and sharing your specialty with us. And again, this is Mark Alexander from Fort Myers. You have a great weekend, Mark, and again, thanks for calling in.
Thank you very much. God bless.
Take care. All right, Jerry. Good guest. That was powerful stuff, and certainly the baby boomer generation is going to need healthcare services more and more, and I think it's a great deal. Tell us about. We've got about 3 minutes left here. I know you've got a big auction that you're involved in. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would, Jerry.
Yes, I was very honored to be asked to chair a national event, which is a collection of commercial real estate firms that have all come together to put on an event. The event is called Auction Point 2013. The website, very simple, auctionpoint.com. Auctionpoint.com. We have over $400 million worth of assets. There's about 150 different commercial real estate estate properties that will be sold online the end of May, starting May 29th. Bidders can go in now, go in and look at all the data, all the due diligence on any asset in that event. You can contact the broker direct. We have over 100 brokerage companies that have come together for this event. The event's sponsored by Auction Point, LoopNet, First American Title, Shandon Economics, and the A10 Capital. So I invite all of our listeners, go to auctionpoint.com. It's like a candy store, Doug, of commercial real estate property.
Very, very good. And I know you fine-tuned that list because you had a lot of people who wanted to get in, but you wanted to make sure that it was a doable deal for not only the seller but the buyer. And so you've really fine-tuned the list. So good job on your behalf.
Thank you. Yes, we have vetted those properties. Those are properties all that will be sold. They're owned by motivated sellers. So investors, buyers, users, go in and take a look around. Auctionpoint.com.
Nice. Okay. And one more time for you, Jerry. How do people get a hold of you?
Very easy. My email is Jerry, Jerry, dot Anderson, Anderson, at svn.com.
Very good. Jerry, thanks for being my co-host, and you have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you next week.
Good day.
All right. Take care. Okay. Great show. We had Jerry Anderson, our co-host. He is from Sperry Van Ness, Palm Beach County. He really kind of runs the whole state of Florida for Sperry Van Ness. And again, this is commercial real estate. And then we had Mark Alexander, who's a CCIM. He's the national chair for medical office buildings for Sperry Van Ness. He is from Fort Myers, Florida. Really gave us some good stuff on that particular specialty. I thank everybody for listening. We will be back next week. Enjoy the nice weather. Enjoy your family. Take care.